I feel like a big part of my role as a Christian and as an artist is to just be an example of somebody that's really working their faith out and almost in a sense giving people confidence to be vulnerable with each other as well.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio. Where faith comes to life.
Hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio with me, John Pantry. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith and ministry, and it's brought to you in association with the UK's leading Christian magazine, Premier Christianity. If you'd like to get a free copy of the latest issue, head to the website premierchristianity.com/free sample. Well, today on The Profile, I'm speaking to Marilyn Baker. Marilyn is one of Britain's most popular and well-loved Christian singer-songwriters. She became blind as a child, but soon demonstrated a gift for music, which took her to the Royal College of Music and then on to a teaching profession. She had a longing to communicate her faith and began writing anointed songs. And during the past 30 years, Marilyn has travelled around the world and released a number of albums. You can hear Marilyn here on Premier Christian Radio every Sunday at 4 p.m. on Reflections, which aims to reach out to people with sight loss and other disabilities and show that they're not alone. Marilyn, welcome to the programme.
Oh, thank you for having me, John.
Lovely to see you. I think we've known each other many years.
We have.
I wouldn't like to say how many.
No.
Just on this show, we like to go back to the beginning and find out about a person's early life. What memories do you have of early family life?
Well, you see, I was an only child, and my mother was like 38 when she had me. That was quite old then. And basically, everyone thought everything was fine. I was premature. They put me in a incubator because I choked, actually, on milk. I think perhaps, I've always loved my food. I ate it a bit too quick. But anyway, the point is that when I came home, all seemed fine then. But I developed a squint. So they took me to the hospital and they kept me in. And then my mother, she always tells me the story, she used to tell me, came on the bus just to get me home and all that. And they took her into the little private room and said, your daughter is going to be blind.
Gosh.
And it was a terrible shock to my mother. She said she came home on the bus just crying. And my father, who he owned a garage, but he couldn't cope with it at all, really. He went into a sort of depression, but it expressed itself in him getting completely buried in work. I think the main effect it had on me, sadly, was that he didn't believe I would achieve anything.
Right,
and if you live in an atmosphere, even when you're young, it's something like in your spirit it gets picked up that people don't really believe in you. You get this feeling that you are a disappointment. And I felt it deep inside. I didn't really know why, because I don't think I fully understood my blindness, if you see what I mean. But I knew that I wasn't quite what they'd hoped for.
When you were told you're going to go blind, or I don't know how that happened to you. You told me how your mother found out. What did it mean to you? Well,
for me, you see, I was brought up in as natural way as possible. I give my parents credit for that. I mean, we lived, there were some woods at the back of our house, and my mum had a little toboggan, and when it was snowing she used to take me on the toboggan and guide it. And my dad, I remember wanting to ride a bike because all my friends were riding bikes. Right. So we had a tricycle, and Dad put a little guide handle on it so that Mum could kind of guide it while I was sort of pedalling, and I felt quite natural. And then at the age of 5, and that was a very early beginning, I went to a boarding school for blind people. And I'll just tell you this, that my mother kept saying to me, you're going to love school, you're going to love school. And she said, but we've got to assess whether you can go to this special school. And I didn't know why it was special, really. But this social worker came to the house, and I thought, I've got to look great for this social worker. And my mother used to go out every weekend to their club, and she'd make herself up. She'd put her beads on and a lipstick and her bangles. So I went into the bedroom and I got all her makeup out, and I put everything on me. I mean, where I put it, I've no idea. I think someone should have taken a picture. But the social worker came, and I said, "Hold on, I'm making myself look posh," I said. So I came down, and do you know, they screamed with laughter. I thought I was looking the tops, I did. But really, they said, "OK, you can definitely go to the school." Now, I went to the school, and all the other children were blind.
Right.
But I think the first recollection of me understanding what blindness might really mean, in a way, I knew I was blind, but it didn't seem very different because all the others were blind, you see. But when I was 9, I was at home, and my father had a customer come to the house, and he introduced the customer to my mother, and then he came to shake my hand, and he kind of drew back and he went, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I had no idea." And suddenly I understood that my blindness was a barrier,
Right.
and that I wasn't going to be treated,
In
if
the
you
same
like,
way.
the same. It was as if suddenly I was an embarrassment,
Right.
if you like. And, well, you know, they
Yes.
brought me up well, but as I say, I had this sense, you know, that then something was different.
Did they instill Christian values into you as a child that are still meaningful and important?
No, because my parents weren't churchgoers at all. I mean, they got me christened and all that. And I think my mother used to read me some Bible stories from a children's Bible, which I liked, but I never understood anything about faith. And when I was 10, well, I'd started learning the oboe. I kept saying I wanted to learn the oboe. They didn't understand why, but I had that in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I learnt the oboe, and I went, you could say in a way, like a child prodigy. Prodigy. What do you say that word? Anyway, never mind about that
Yes,
word.
prodigy,
But I went
yes.
to Blackpool to play as a guest oboist, a concerto with a youth orchestra.
Oh, wow.
At the Winter Gardens it was.
Yes.
It was quite a big event. And I met a family. It was my oboe teacher's family, and they were Christian Scientists.
Uh-huh.
And they started to talk to me about spiritual things. And this was the first contact I'd ever had with what you might call anything sort of spiritual. And I could feel they were a community. I could feel there was sort of love. And something deep within me wanted it. And I remember for months after wanting to find out what this was all about. Something was stirred within me. I didn't actually manage to find out about that because there wasn't any stuff in Braille, as a matter of fact, that I could read because I'd learnt Braille by then and everything. But nevertheless, something was stirred.
Right. So at what point did you then become a Christian? That must have taken another step.
Oh, it did. Well, I went to, in the end, this only grammar school for blind people then. Now there's a lot of emphasis on integration in schools. So, you know, but then I went to this blind grammar school, as it were, near London in Hertfordshire. And a friend of mine started a Christian club in the school. And she asked me if I wanted to join it. And I thought, oh, a new activity.
Mm-hmm.
So I went along, and she started talking about Jesus. And I thought, this is like embarrassing. I thought he died years ago, you know, and I thought he was just a famous bloke in history. But the more she talked about him, and then I went down to the cellar I found this book in Braille, and it was called The Transforming Friendship by Leslie Weatherhead.
Uh-huh.
And I started to read it, and something deep was stirring within me. And Billy Graham came to Britain to do some mission or other, and we went to something. It wasn't him, actually. They took us. The school did. And do you know, all the questions I'd longed to know, it was as if he knew what I was thinking.
Right.
And at the end, he said, if anyone wants to be saved, put your hand up. And I did. I put my hand up, but we had to be whisked back to the boarding school.
Right, so you couldn't
So I
go
couldn't
forward.
talk to anybody,
Right.
but I prayed the prayer. And that night, I knew something had happened. It was as if I'd felt quite lonely at school in a way, away from my parents. There was a lot of struggles, me trying to keep up academically.
Mm-hmm.
But that night I felt and knew that I would never be alone again.
Right.
It was like a love came deep into my heart. And I woke up the next morning. I thought, will it have gone by the next morning? Is it just like a dream? And it hadn't.
Right.
And I told my friends that I was saved. I used that word. And they said, what do you mean? I said, I don't know, but I know I am. And they said, you can't know. I said, I can. It was like, and I developed from there. But then, of course, after that, I went on to the Royal College of Music, and I should say that it was there that my faith really took off.
Right, brilliant. Do you ever consider that you'll have a chance to say thank you to Billy one day?
I think I will. I think I know I will.
What a thought. And how has your faith changed over the years, Marilyn? I mean, how is it different now from what it was in the beginning? Many people, when they first come to faith, everything is black and white.
You're dead right.
And then as they grow, it gets a little more shades of grey. But what about you?
I believe that's true for me. I mean, when I first became a Christian, it was a very strict regime. For instance, all Christians then that I knew, they didn't drink anything. And I stopped having a little drink with my family. I mean, we didn't drink loads. We just had a little shandy sometimes and stuff. And my parents sadly equated me not drinking with saying that I was holier than they were, and almost equated it with the fact that I was a Christian, and this is something that restricted them. And when I remember changing my mind about that, and I said, oh no, I'll have a shandy, and they said, have you stopped being a Christian then? So it's amazing, isn't it? How we can... But anyway, as life went on, I got baptised in the Spirit, and I became like prayer secretary at the Royal College of Music, and then I went to this little home group. We were in Watford then, we lived, and this man came and prophesied into my life. I'd never really heard of prophecy either. And he said, you're going to be a musical missionary.
Wow.
And you're going to travel the nations. And I thought, gosh, what's that all about,
Right.
And bit by bit, you see, I began to realise as well, and this was perhaps very pivotal for me, because my father had been very disappointed in me, and he was a strict father figure. But I began to find that God, although there were rules and things that I'd seen in the Bible, that he was the most incredible father, and that he gave us freedom to choose. And that, I remember one day sitting quietly and feeling disappointed that, again, Dad hadn't really believed that I'd achieve certain things. And it was like in my heart I felt God say, but I know what you can do. With you and me together, we're living life together. And I've got plans for you that nothing's going to stop them.
Right. And you've become a kind of a Billy Graham in your own style, haven't you?
Well, yes.
Because your concerts and events and things that you do, along with Tracy, we'll talk more about that in a moment, are very much evangelistic. Are there stories where you've really seen God at work in people's lives, seen a transformation at some of those events?
Absolutely. I mean, it's usually through the songs that we hear about transformation. I remember there was one lady, and somebody, she was in prison for a very serious crime, for murder really, but she, we won't go into what happened, but the point is she wanted to commit suicide. She felt so low, and the chaplain gave her a CD. Well, no, it was a cassette then, I suppose. And she listened to the songs, and hope was born in her heart, and she became a Christian. And they wrote to us to tell us, and we went to visit this dear lady, and we kept in touch with her, and her life was really completely changed. But there are many stories like that. Another man that was an alcoholic, he came through as well, and lots of people began to realise that they weren't just a number, but they were loved and valued by our wonderful Heavenly Father. And I think that's what my songs bring across. So I don't know, but I suppose I'll meet many that have being changed and transformed.
What a wonderful thought, yeah. And it's not just through the music that is anointed. You are very much involved in a prayer ministry. What does that mean to you? What does it mean for the work that you do?
Well, because of the baggage that I had in my life and the problems, I received a lot of prayer myself. At the beginning, it was through an organisation called Torch Trust, and that's what the premier broadcast, we do that, Reflections, we do that with
The
Torch
weekly
Trust,
programme,
you see.
yeah.
But they helped me a lot to get over some of this deep stuff in my life. And I realised that every one of us has baggage. I mean, we can concentrate on all that too much, but I believe the more we can get over the hurts in our lives and truly forgive from the heart, the more room there is for God's wonderful Holy Spirit to use us then as a channel. So at our retreats and the stuff we do, the conferences, we make a real point of having appointments with people who may want to share things that they would find it difficult to share with people that they know well. And then we can pray with them, and we have people coming to see us, on a regular basis. But the marvellous thing is when we see the change coming and they can move on.
Right.
I certainly needed people to help me move on. And that's what we try to do now. And we see God doing some amazing things where people can move from one place where they've been totally stuck to a new place where they suddenly realise that they are so loved, they don't need to hang on to this stuff.
Do you think church and society's attitudes have changed towards people with some form of disability, some obvious form like blindness or the inability to walk?
Yes, actually, at the moment, Torch Trust is doing a wonderful project called Sight Loss Friendly Church. We're trying to get people to understand how important it is, for instance, not just to put everything up on a screen, because if you do, the blind person misses out unless they are some way described what's happening. I remember once going to a prayer meeting in a church and all the points were put up on a screen.
Right.
And they said, look at these points and then we'll pray about them. And somebody read me, there was too many to read me all, but, worship and things like that, we do need to be included in stuff like that. So Torch are helping with all that. But the point is, I believe that people are understanding in a new way that people with disabilities are not just to be looked after. We always talk about the accessible toilet or, the disabled toilet or something like that they've managed to get into church. Well, we've got gifts. We've got the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, whether we've got a disability or not. And so we need to find our place where we can be not just, cared about, but used and develop a ministry. Perhaps my own ministry has helped people to understand the importance of that this can all happen. But, it's very exciting now because I believe that people are understanding that the church as a whole, we've all got different gifts. Some, yes, they may have a disability, but they've still got equal value and something very important to contribute.
Right. I remember talking many years ago to Joni Eareckson Tada. I worked with her for a few days, and she was saying how so many people have tried to pray with her and said, step out of the wheelchair and all will be well, and God will hear our prayers. And of course nothing had happened. Have you been through that experience of people insisting that they pray for you and then perhaps being disappointed themselves that you've not received your sight?
Yes, I certainly have. I think it's this insisting on praying with you that is difficult. Because I do believe God heals wonderfully today. We've seen it in our own retreats that we've run where people have been healed. I haven't personally, but God's healing power is at work in our world. And that's terrific. I don't understand why, not all are healed or anything like that. But you see, if you want healing, it was everyone that came to him that were healed. And I think some people have got such an excitement about healing, they don't understand sometimes that someone may not be ready or even wanting that kind of prayer. So if they get jumped on, it can even put them off.
And do you think God has had a plan? I mean, certainly with someone like Joni Eareckson Tada, I can see that she had an amazing ministry to other people who were paraplegic because she could speak to them. They were on her level, she was on their level, in a way that an able-bodied person wouldn't be. Has God got a plan to use people in their disability rather than heal them?
Well, I think he always uses people in wherever stage they are in their disability. And, we don't know, do we, quite why healing doesn't happen as maybe it could. But we know that God does use people within their disability. The only problem for me, though, is that sometimes people have said, oh, it's because you're blind, people listen to you and they love your music, you're blind. I'd like people to love my music, whether they knew I was blind or not. I'd like them to love the ministry that I do,
yes.
Whether or not I'm blind. You get what I mean? I
do.
understand it has an effect. And a lot of times
Yeah.
when Tracy and I are working together, because Tracy is profoundly deaf and I'm blind, people wonder how we can be so joyful, how we can do things together. And this does bring glory to God, because it's through his strength that our ministry has developed together.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that wonderful combination of you and Tracy. I've seen you working together on occasion. As you say, Tracy is profoundly deaf. And how is it that you work together?
Well, in about 85, I remember meeting Tracy. She came to my house for a meal because she'd met someone, and she'd heard of me, but being deaf, she didn't really listen to singers much. And we had a bit of fun because I'd forgot she was coming. Well, at least I knew, but I thought she'd be later. And I had my hair dyed. And when I arrived, at the door, we opened the door to her, and I was dripping with red.
Oh.
And she thought I'd had an accident. Oh. Anyway, it started a good laugh. It actually was so informal the way we met. The friendship began at that point.
One of those immediate connections.
It was marvellous. Now, Trace was very deaf, but I had known another lady that was very deaf who died actually a couple of years before, and I'd become very close to her. So the fact that she was deaf didn't faze me in any way. And we got chatting, and in those days, Trace could hear a lot more. But I was looking for somebody to be what you might call a soulmate in the ministry. I'd been going for some time. I'd given up my teaching in 82, and I'd travelled a lot abroad. But I needed help in the sense, not just practical help, but a spiritual partner that would sort of take the weight with me. And she had a real prophetic gift and words of knowledge. She was only a young Christian then, but she started to say stuff in our meetings, because in the end I said to her, will you just come and help me out, because I can't find anyone to work with me at the moment, and I need someone to come on the road.
Right.
And so she did. She said, I'm going to do a social work thing with blind people, but I will help you out for the time being. But the more she spoke and the more she took part, I thought, gosh, this girl's anointed.
Right.
She shouldn't be doing social work. She should be out here with me. And in the end, we did decide that we would work together, much to the consternation of our trustees, actually, with two people with disabilities. We then needed to employ someone else who could help us both, actually, and a driver. And this is all in our new book, because Tracy's doing a new book about our lives.
How exciting.
Which will be really exciting, I think, because it will talk about how we've managed to work together and all. But it was very exciting. But as the years went by, Tracy became more deaf. And so we had to find new ways of learning to communicate together, because obviously what we're doing is vital that she does hear.
Right.
And now with modern technology, we use her iPad. I type with a Bluetooth keyboard, and she can still read big stuff on the screen. And we also use this language that people have seen us manage, language on the hand. It's called the manual. It's for deaf-blind people.
Right.
But, there's a lot of things Trace doesn't always hear, and I have to be up to speed. And there's a lot of patience required in our communication skills. We take quite a long time. We can't just chat while we're doing the cooking. Right. If we want to talk about something, we have to sit down and make a special time to communicate. But I still believe that with her great wisdom that God gives her writing ability, and the love, I mean, she was given a name. You know how God can sort of give you a nickname? Well, I don't know whether you do, but I believe he does sometimes. Right. And her name was Daughter of Mercy.
Right.
Because her heart was so full of mercy. I've seen it time and time again in her. And so together we make a good team, and I feel so privileged that God put me with this dear lady Tracy to work.
Well, I've seen you working. It's a wonderful combination. You spoke earlier about how Torch Trust had really helped you to overcome some of the things that had been built into your life through at times what was a difficult childhood. And now you're a chairperson for Torch Trust.
I am at the moment.
Tell us more about that.
Well, basically, you see, our organisation works across denominations to help people understand the importance of, as I say, inclusiveness. But also, Torch produces wonderful literature, which is sometimes very large print, or audio, or Braille. You see, there's not many books in Braille that people can read. And the founders actually started Torch because they met people who'd become Christians. They became Christians, and then there wasn't anything for them. And the command was, feed them, give them something to eat. And so we long, as an organisation, to see people growing in their faith. That is our passion.
Right.
And so I've been working with Torch, and we've run holidays for people with sight loss as well. And so we try, and there's fellowship groups. There are groups across the country where if you are losing your sight and you feel you want to get together with others to feel that connection, and I suppose you could say being built up together and learning things together, then you can join a group. There are a lot around the country, but there are different. Sometimes there are book groups. Sometimes it's a service.
You travel around the UK a great deal. There's often much in the press these days about the fact that the major denominations are losing people month on month, year on year. The official church is diminishing. What do you see that encourages you?
Well, I see something very interesting where churches are really working together in a town and praying together. It's very obvious to me that there are real movements going on of, strengthening power of the Holy Spirit. It's as if there's something that changes in the atmosphere when churches are praying and working together.
Right.
There's an effectiveness that seems to come into their work. When we're standoffish with each other and kind of, don't work together, somehow or other it blocks God, I believe. And so I think there are some very exciting initiatives going on at the moment.
And you've seen this happening. You got a very full schedule in the coming year, have you? Are you
yes,
still
we're
out?
quite busy, absolutely. I mean,
tell us a little bit about some of the highlights.
Well, one thing we were going to do in September, it's a real opportunity. We're going to the Christian Resources Trade Exhibition to meet people in the trade, because last year I produced 2 new albums. I hadn't actually done any albums for a long time, but I was full of songs, if you like, songs that I wanted to record. So I did a worshipful one called Joy of My Heart, and then I did a Christmas one, which around Christmas time, it was a great evangelistic tool. I was able to give it away to a lot of people. So that caused some real interest, and I'm glad they went well, these albums. And so they want me to do a concert at the Christian Resources Trade Exhibition as well. And I think Tracy's and I's new book, that will be highlighted as well. And then, of course, we do run these retreats. And when you say retreat, perhaps it's the wrong word, because they're sort of refreshment and renewal weeks. Retreat makes it sound like they can be silent ones.
Do you theme them in any way?
Yes, we do, really. A lot of what we do, because in a way it's the most important thing to us, is to do with relationship with God. We call it like intimacy with God. Because the most important thing as far as we're concerned is people learning to tune in to Him.
Right.
If people tune into His voice and learn how to really hear Him through different ways, of course the Bible is the standard way, but you know what I mean. There are different ways of hearing His voice, yes, and developing that relationship and conversational lifestyle with Him. Then of course their lives will be leaning on him in a new way. And it's only as we really lean on him and experience him in that way that I believe things are sorted out in life. So a lot of what we do is to do with teaching people to come into that deeper, closer intimacy with God.
And are you able ever to follow up with people after they've been to a
yes,
a retreat,
quite a few
conference?
come back to us actually,
Oh,
and
do
we
they?
also run a little group, which is a very small one in our home.
Right.
And we have people learning to listen, learning to tune in,
Right.
and then learning to give out
Right.
what they hear from God.
Right.
It's a big emphasis in our lives, because the thing about it is, for Tracy, she doesn't hear conversation, but in
Okay.
her heart she really hears the Lord speaking,
How
often in a
fascinating.
very prophetic way.
Right.
And one day she said, "Oh, your sound engineer, I believe our Paul is going to be leaving us in a year." And I said, "How can you say that?" And she'd had a dream.
Oh.
And, it was so accurate
Right.
what happened. And it prepared us, because we had to do an awful lot of preparing to manage without Paul.
Right.
He'd been involved in so many things. And it took us round about that year to get ourselves ready for his move.
Right.
And I
Right.
thought, Lord, you're amazing. That's why the gifts of the Spirit are so vital in the church today.
Absolutely.
So we want to help people in a personal way develop, and also to see themselves. Well, there's a book I read once. It was called Living as the Beloved.
Mm-hmm.
Beloved. It's a bit old-fashioned, that word beloved, but I believe that if we could live out of knowing that we are so beloved, our lives would be very different. So that's what we try to instill in our conferences and
Right.
Rest and Renewal days. To me, that's a real passion.
Do you ever look back and think that week, that day, that event, that was a real highlight? I mean, what have been the top highlights of the last 40 years? I can hardly believe it.
It's hard to think of them right. In fact, I remember once we were at a centre, and a lady. I mean, this is amazing. She'd come to the conference, and she was really sad because she'd had a stroke, and she had to give up a lot of her church work, and her husband was a carer. And there was a lady on my team, because one of the things we always do, we have a lovely team, and our team, they vary according to what conference we do, but they're like family. And I think the fact that they're like family, our team, the way they work together, it brings that family feel to our conferences. And people sometimes say they've never felt more loved and more looked after, if you like.
All right.
And I think that's special, because we're not just like, distant. We love to get right alongside them. So this lady who'd had the stroke, she felt Lord was saying to her that he wanted her to step out of her comfort zone. And another member of the team said, I think, he wants you to pray with the one that's got a stroke. Right. So she was very hesitant. She'd been healed herself of a stroke. Mm-hmm. And so she went to the lady and talked gently with her. This is the point, not jumping on her. And they started to pray together. And that dear lady was totally healed of the stroke.
Wow.
Now, the change that I saw in that lady was so exciting. I mean, she was full of it. She'd been so quiet before, she couldn't stop talking. She couldn't stop telling everybody about how she'd felt the love of God. Another time, we used to run a thing, it was called Meeting with the Father. And we used to have little worship points around a room. And we used to have quiet music playing, and people would kind of move around the room. Like we'd have a place where they could have a cup of tea, as if they were sitting with the Father having a cup of tea. Do you know what I mean? It sounds mad on the radio. But one of the things we had out there was a duvet. And we used to say, wrap yourself in the duvet and imagine it's God's love. Well, this lady, she did just that. And she'd felt very kind of icy, she said, in her heart. And suddenly she started to shout, I feel so hot, and it's not just the duvet. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I know that I'm loved. I know that I'm loved. And she'd had an encounter with the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Perhaps we'd call it soaking or whatever. I don't know. Different people call these things different names. But she was encountering the love of God.
Right.
And her life started to open up in a new way. And because we don't run great big events, because Tracy and I couldn't cope with that, I think people do have often very personal times with us.
Sounds absolutely wonderful. And you will continue until you drop, or till heaven arrives?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm obviously going to slow down a bit, I suppose. But at the moment, we have got quite a lot going on. And as long as we're physically able to go for it,
right.
Well,
I'm sure many people listening will be thinking, well, I hope she doesn't give up in my lifetime, because I know they've benefited so enormously from your ministry. Marilyn, thank you so much for talking to us.
Premier Christianity Magazine.
Are you fed up with fake news or bored of bad stories? We think it's time for something different. I'm Sam Hales, editor of Premier Christianity Magazine. Every month, our team publishes stories of lives transformed, testimonies, miracles, healings, and loads more good news. We're here to encourage you, excite you, and keep you up to date with all that God is doing through His church. That's why we're proud to bring you a magazine that's different.
For your free copy, visit premierchristianity.com/free sample. The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio. Where faith comes to life.
Good evening, you're listening to The Profile in association with Premier Christianity Magazine. I'm Marcus Jones, and in the second part of today's programme, we'll hear from Timo Soini, a former Deputy Prime Minister of Finland. Timo's a larger-than-life character who wears his faith on his sleeve. But it's that public faith which has caused him problems, not too dissimilar to that of Tim Farron here in the UK, whose faith was targeted when in public office. For his politics, he's been described as Finland's equivalent of Nigel Farage, a more moderate version, he protests when I put it to him. He grew his minor political party exponentially, leading him to a seat at the top table. We'll hear him talk passionately about seeing religion thrive in public life, and he's undefiant following his experiences. But let's start at the beginning and find out whether young Timo ever dreamed of being one of the top politicians in the country.
Not at the age of 8 or something. It was to be a footballer or ice hockey player or a train driver or something like that.
So what went wrong?
Merely everything. But at the age of 14 or roughly somewhere, I got interested in politics, and of course I didn't have a clue then what was coming. But the appetite increased very rapid way, and by the end of age of 16. I joined the Finnish Rural Party, so which was a kind of a small peasant party at the time, and so that got started.
So some people enter politics because they want to make a difference. Some do it because they want the power. What motivated you?
Actually, it was the person of the then leader of the Rural Party, who was a man called Veikko Vennamo, who was very active after the Second World War in politics in the Centre Party, which was the agrarian party of Finland, and he is the man who settled all the migrants from the areas what we lost to Soviet Union in the war. Roughly 500,000 Karelian people had to leave their premises and come to Finland, and Veikko Vennamo was in charge of the office to deliver new homes and new premises for those people, and he was a very charismatic guy. And Finland, even so, we had 500,000 Finns having left their homes. We didn't have a single refugee camp in Finland. But he got trouble in the Centre Party because there was a power struggle, and he left and founded a party of his own, the Peasant Party. And my background on the mother's side is the peasant family with 8 children and 7 cows. So that is the background kind of philosophical background for that. I'm a city boy myself, but on the mother's side, it started like this.
So, on the faith side of things, you were originally a Lutheran in Finland, which is, I guess, the main denomination of Christians.
Yes, that's right. The main domination, roughly 80-90% were Lutheran. Now it has synced for something 72 or something. I was baptized Lutheran, and my family was Lutheran by origin, yeah.
But that changed and you converted to Catholicism. Tell us about that.
Yes, it did. In the middle of 1980s. I have been Christian all my life, and certain active as well, but I'm a conservative, on the conservative flank, and I got angry when the women were ordained to be priests. So I went in a way in the limbo situation for a while, and then John Paul II was nominated to be the Pope, and he was very principled person and very holy person, I think, and I got in a way carried away a little bit by him, and then I went to Ireland by Interrail plus ship, and I was there with my friends, and I visited all the churches, and my friends, sometimes if it was church beautiful enough, they came to look the architecture or something. And then I went to Killarney, St. Mary's Cathedral, and it struck me, and I went there with my friends, and friends said that let's go further, let's go to the lakes and so forth. And I decided to come back next morning just by myself, and there was an Irish nun there, and we talked a lot, and I got very strong experience and feeling also there by myself. And the nun said to me that you are going to be Catholic, and within 1.5 years this did happen, and I converted.
But converting in Ireland wouldn't be such a big thing because there's so many Catholics in Ireland, but in Finland, not so much.
In Finland it is, and I'm rather happy that it hasn't been made very easy, so that you cannot just go inside and sign the letter or something like that. You have to go to the so-called course, where in due course of time, 7-8 months, there will be teaching once in 3 weeks or roughly so about what is Catholic doctrine and what is this and that. Just to make sure that you are knowing what you are doing and what you are committed to, and it was good, and of course when you do a thing like that, it's very how would I say, uncommon that people are changing their denomination, but I did it, and I have been practicing Catholic since.
Faith and politics. A lot of people say those two things can't mix. How did you find being a Catholic in a political career?
Yeah, it's very strange that sometimes these denominations are raising a lot of feelings and emotions. Everybody knew when I was elected to be vice chair of the Rural Party as early at the age of 26, and this happened 1989. So everybody knew more or less that I'm a Catholic in all Protestant country, and it didn't matter at all. And I have been voted 4 times in the Finnish Parliament, once in the European Parliament, 5 times to the local city council, and everybody knows. But it didn't matter, and even some of my friends who are, to be modest, agnostic in the same suburbs what we grown up, they said that we don't care about your convictions, we care about you, and so I haven't lost votes to be openly Christian, and that has also encouraged. So I didn't have to compromise. Even if people disagreed, they said, okay, that is your personal matter, and if you have tax policy right, and if you have education policy right, or whatever, they didn't matter. But there are certain issues which are hard issues, and it's okay to be a Christian as long as you don't say anything about sin or some perceptions like that.
And maybe we'll talk about this in a second, but the UK is certainly going through a period of that with a number of cases. But when you were in your role, faith did become a problem. You had a situation where you were in Canada carrying out duties for the government. Talk us through that and how that problem came about.
That happened in May 2018. I was on official visit to Canada as a foreign minister of Finland, and so it happened that at night I used to enter and attend to masses, and I went to the Catholic Church, and there was no mass there, but there was a leaflet telling that next night there will be a candlelight vigil in the monument of some kind of monument outside, and for the aborted children, and at the 9 o'clock in the evening. And I decided, and I said to my state secretary, who was with me, that whether tomorrow, if we have time after the commitments, we shall go there. And so we did. And there was a candlelight vigil, there was candles burning, and young females were talking about their lives and challenges and worries, and how they have kept their children, and tough stories. And then we light the candles for the aborted children. And my state secretary, Samuli Virtanen, took the picture about us, the kind of selfie about us. And we put that into Twitter, or he did. He asked me permission to do that. And nothing did happen for roughly 2 weeks, until the hell broke loose, when the tabloids find out that, okay, you have been in Canada on an official visit, even outside the hours of official program. You have been participating the so-called anti-abortion event, even though that was a vigil. And then there was a lot of criticism in the press. People made the writers, female writer Elina Hirvonen made a complaint. There were several others to the Chancellor of Justice, whether I have broke the law as a Minister for Foreign Affairs, and there were several accusations for Chancellor of Justice to investigate whether it is against the law or whether I have violated the agreement of Vienna and so forth and so forth. And of course, when Chancellor of Justice got those complaints, he must investigate the case. And the charges or the questions were really tough one, and also very juridical one. And I had to answer for them in fairly short notice, maybe 2-3 months' time. And I did, and I got help, which was very, very good. There is a story that I got an email from a lady. I baptized her, the Alice of Wonderland, who said that she could help me with the legal issues about this. And it was she didn't know the Finnish language, but she was familiar with Finland, being there for some time. And then the whole accusations or the questions were translated to her. Her team and other people assisted me and gave a package of extraordinary depth, maybe some 10 pages about all court cases throughout. Why it was not appropriate to criticize me on any way on these issues. And this organization was ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, Religious Freedom, And it was a great help because it was twofold process. The first was this kind of juridical process, because it is a matter of utmost seriousness if the minister breaks his vow to the state. And so it was, the decision was given by the Chancellor of Justice 18th of September, and he cleared my reputation. He said that after investigations, Mr. Soini hasn't break any law. And then there was a comma and but. He would have or should have been more precautious in a way that there wouldn't be any chance that his official role or his personal beliefs could be mixed in any way, and so forth. Of course, this wasn't something he should investigate. It was just to investigate whether I have broken a law or not. And I didn't. But of course, then there was a political process, which was very harsh, because I have openly expressed my pro-life views concerned also when there was a referendum in Ireland and Argentinian Senate chamber to these issues. And the opposition roused the vote of confidence personally against me in the Finnish parliament. And of course there was also people on the centre-right government which I represented, a coalition government with 3 parties. There were quite many who criticized my views that I shouldn't do this. And there was not many people, not many politicians supported me vocally, but there was one, Päivi Räsänen, who is now herself in trouble. But we went to the vote of confidence, which I did win in the Finnish parliament by 100 vote against 60, and then there was 18 abstention or something like that. Quite many MPs said to me in the corridors, Timo, don't worry, we will vote for your confidence, but we won't say anything. So I did go quite a hellish times for a few months, because press was especially hostile, and because if you are pro-life person in Finland, it is very tough times, because abortion is virtually free on social grounds and so forth. And if you dare to say that I'm pro-life, I believe the sanctity of life, you will be criticized. And even if you are in the position like Deputy Prime Minister, Premier, I wasn't at that moment anymore. I was first 2 years, but I had been, and I was the Minister for Foreign Affairs, which is the top 3 rank in Finnish government, Minister for Finance, Premier, and then this is the kind of triangle. And it was heavy criticism in the press. But I did go to the programs, I give interviews, and I said that this is my personal conviction, this is freedom of speech, this is a freedom of religion, I don't give in any of this, I won't apologize, I won't regret. And so I did win both cases, but it was very nasty process, and also the people, the family and the closest friends and parents and everything. It was nasty, but I'm happy now afterwards that I went it through, but wouldn't recommend.
Well, I'm sure you're aware of the situation of Tim Farron here in the UK.
Yeah.
So a very similar case in which he was repeatedly questioned by the media over his views about homosexuality. He's not the only person, though. We've had a number of politicians, and increasingly on the Catholic pro-life side. We've had a politician called Rob Flello, who was stopped from standing in the election last year. One of the hopefuls in the leadership race for the Labour Party has recently been criticised for her pro-life views as well. This isn't a case of just Finland. This isn't a case of just the UK. It seems to be increasing. What would you say to those who have kind of traditional biblical beliefs on things like sexuality, on things like life issues? What would you say to those who are looking at this situation of politics and thinking, I'd love to be in politics, but it's not for me, I can't do it?
I very, very strongly encourage you to go there and take the heat and and be there because you are supported by much many people than you can even imagine, and we cannot get rid of the great principles of our democracy, which guarantees the freedom of speech and freedom of religions. If we voluntarily give in those values, we make a huge mistake. But be also aware that you will be hit hard, and that is why, because there is going to be twofold processes. It's criticism. What is the other thing, that you are bullied and you are in a way criticized? But then there is this other one, which I'm very worried, is this so-called hate speech legislation, and to make your opinions in a way criminal, which must be tackled. And that is why we also need these cases and need publicity, even though it is very harsh for the people attached and connected. But otherwise you will be buried in silence, and this cannot happen. This shouldn't happen. And I also encourage in that sense that you can end up with quite a strange bedfellows on this, because there are people who are defending freedom of speech on the different flanks of the society. Even if you don't agree with, there can be hard left, there can be hard right on the issues. You don't believe and you don't share their views. But one of the greatest conception of freedom of speech was, like George Orwell said in 1984, that the freedom is also that you can say something which offends somebody. That is also freedom.
Do you see, are you hopeful? Do you see light in the situation that things are going to change?
In due course of time, if we are persistent, if we are brave enough. But otherwise, now we are going very gross way to the very bad direction, because those issues are raised in every country virtually, and just these two particular things, which is pro-life views, and then if you are a believer in the so-called traditional marriage between one man and one woman, which is also my stand, and they try to make that in a way old-fashioned, even illegal, and that is very, very essential part of the Christian doctrine. It cannot be compromised.
It would seem to me that our society is growing more and more divided, not just about faith issues.
Yeah.
You've only got to look at Brexit here in the country.
Yeah.
And you have two people on two sides of an issue. And it's not just the case that I can now just disagree with you and that's fine. But if I disagree with you, you are now my enemy.
Yeah.
And I think if we bring in this kind of freedom of speech things, we bring in the political issues, it's a very difficult society that we're setting up.
It is indeed, and it's on the longer run, it's also dangerous. If it's so far so good, it is. If we disagree, if we make a good battles of conversation and let the best argument win and whatever, and that's democracy. That's a freedom of speech and freedom of religion and everything else. But if you really go to that far, that if you don't agree with me, you not only disagree, but you hate me, or I hate you, or we don't have any kind of mutual respect, that will end to the very, very dangerous position, and divides a nation and divides nations and families and friends, and that is now the direction we are going, and also. The language is very important in politics. I know it when I was there so many times. Now we are banning the certain words. Of course, it shouldn't be a way of sport to say something offended. But if we are, for example, with you argumenting, and if I say something which I say that this is challenging Marcus in that sense, and if you feel offended, if you think yourself that I said something which offended you, and and I didn't mean that, but if you feel that, then I'm guilty. This is very, very dangerous path to go into, and this so-called identity politics is very dangerous, and this will divide not just the people but also the spaces and the areas. There will be then said that okay, you can speak that way in the church, but you cannot way this and in the marketplace or in the pub or in the public place, in the internet, and that cannot be compromised, and this is really dangerous direction where to go. And there are minorities of all kind of minorities who also should be protected, but there are also minorities which are very militant, who want to dictate you what you should think and what you should believe or not to believe. And the great thing about freedom is that we can choose what to believe, we can choose our leaders, and if we don't like them, we can vote them out.
I can't let you leave without talking about your third passion. We talked about faith, we talked about politics, we have to talk about football. Now, let me just soak this in for a second. From Finland, support Millwall. Talk us through that.
Yeah, the story behind this goes as far as at the year of 1976. There was a game alive in Finnish telly, Millwall playing Luton at Old Den, 13th of November 1976. And I saw that game in my own telly. Barry Kitchener scored, Seisman scored, Brisley scored, and I think was it Phil Walker, and since that moment, because they were playing in Finnish colors, they have blue shirts, white shirts, and lion emblem crest on the place of the heart, and that is when it started, and it took me 9 years to get into the Old Den and see the games, and I have seen coming since that. More or less, maybe 2-3 times a year.
You've been listening to The Profile. That was former Deputy Prime Minister of Finland, Timo Soini, in conversation with me, Marcus Jones. For more great interviews, download The Profile podcast at premierchristianradio.com/The Profile.